The sun hung motionless in the sky, a golden eye refusing to blink. At first, the people dismissed it as a trick of the mind, an unusually long afternoon. But as the hours passed and the evening never came, fear tightened its grip on the land. Shadows did not lengthen. The cool breeze of dusk never arrived, and the air grew unbearably thick. Merchants abandoned their stalls, farmers paused mid-harvest, and mothers clutched their children close. Whispers slithered through the street. Had the gods forsaken them? Had Ra himself turned his face away? Or had something far more terrifying occurred? In the great temple of Heliopolis, priests gathered in frantic desperation, their sacred sundials casting the same motionless shadow. Never in history had Ra failed to make his journey across the sky. The high priests pored over ancient scrolls, seeking an omen, a prophecy, anything that could explain the unthinkable. Sweat dripped from their brows as their voices rose in anxious debate. No offering, no prayer, no sacrifice could stir the heavens from their unnatural stillness. Outside, fear spread like wildfire. The people turned their eyes to the sky, waiting, hoping. But the sun remained frozen above them. At first, the people searched for a reason, an explanation rooted in the gods' displeasure. Perhaps the kingdom had sinned, or an offering had been refused. But soon, a new whisper wove its way through the frightened crowds. A name passed from lips to ears like a forbidden secret. Neferura, a woman, a mere mortal, yet somehow tied to the sun's defiance. The old midwife spoke of the strange mark on her palm, shimmering like fire at her birth. The farmers remembered how, as a child, she had spoken to the sun as if it were alive. The temple scribes murmured of the day she had dared to question the high priests, speaking of the cosmos in ways that unsettled even the wisest scholars. What had seemed like harmless curiosity before now felt like an omen, a warning they had all ignored. Could it be her? Could she be the reason the sun refused to move? Inside the grand palace, bathed in the golden light of a sun that would not set, the pharaoh stood in silence. His advisors, gathered in uneasy clusters, avoided his gaze, their fear barely concealed behind careful expressions. The tension in the chamber was suffocating, as if the air itself had thickened with the weight of an unspeakable truth. Finally, the pharaoh spoke, his voice slow and deliberate. "The sun has never disobeyed Ra's will," he said, "and yet it remains unmoving. If this is not the work of the gods, then who holds such power?" No one dared answer. The silence stretched unbearably, until at last an elderly scribe, his hands trembling, stepped forward. His voice was barely a whisper. "There is one," he said. "A woman who has spoken of the sun all her life. One whose name is feared in the temples. Neferura." The pharaoh's expression darkened. His jaw clenched. His command was final. "Find her." Neferura's fate was written on her skin before she had even drawn her first breath. The midwife gasped as she unwrapped the newborn from the folds of linen, revealing a strange mark upon the infant's tiny palm, a golden symbol, unlike anything she had ever seen. The villagers whispered that it was an omen, a sign from the gods. Some believed she was blessed by Ra himself, destined for greatness, while others feared she carried a curse too powerful for a mere mortal to bear. Her father, a humble farmer, dismissed the rumors and raised her with love. But even he could not ignore the way Neferura gazed at the sky, as if she could hear something no one else could. She was different. While other children played in the fields, she sat for hours by the river, watching the reflection of the sun dance upon the water. Sometimes she would speak to it, her voice soft, reverent, as if greeting an old friend. The villagers shook their heads, and whispered among themselves. They told her to lower her eyes, to act like the others, but Neferura could not. Even as a child, she knew the sun was watching her just as she watched it. As Neferura grew, her strange connection to the sun only deepened. The villagers often found her standing atop the hills, arms outstretched, bathed in golden light as if she belonged to it. She spoke of things no one had taught her, of the movement of the stars, the dance of the seasons, the power that guided the heavens. The elders scolded her for speaking of such mysteries, warning that knowledge of the gods was not meant for ordinary people. But Neferura did not feel ordinary. The animals seemed to sense it too. Birds landed fearlessly beside her, and even the skittish desert foxes lingered in her presence. Her father, though wary of the rumors surrounding his daughter, never tried to change her. He would only watch her with quiet concern as she traced patterns in the sand, whispering secrets only she could understand. The village children called her the girl who speaks to the sky, sometimes in wonder, sometimes in mockery. But Neferura paid them no mind. Deep within her, she felt an unshakable truth. One day, the sun would answer her. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, an old priest arrived at the village, leaning heavily on his staff. His robes were worn, his face lined with the weight of many years, but his eyes were sharp as they rested upon Neferura. He had heard whispers of the girl with the mark of the sun, and had come to see if the rumors were true. The villagers gathered around as he called her forward, studying the golden imprint on her palm with reverence and unease. "This is no ordinary child," he murmured, his voice carrying the weight of something ancient. He turned his gaze to her father. "You must be careful. The gods have placed something upon her that is not meant for this world." Neferura felt the weight of his words, but she did not cower. Instead, she met his eyes with quiet defiance. "Why was I given this mark if I am not meant to use it?" she asked. The priest hesitated before answering, his voice barely above a whisper. "Because the gods are watching, and when the time comes, they will demand something in return." With that, he turned and left, leaving behind an unease that clung to the air like a storm waiting to break. After the priest's visit, Neferura's curiosity could no longer be contained. She longed for answers. Who had placed this mark upon her? What was its purpose? And why did she feel as if the sun itself was waiting for her to understand something no one else could see? She sought knowledge wherever she could find it, listening to travelers who spoke of distant lands, sneaking into the village temple to overhear the priests as they studied the stars. In time, she came to understand the cycles of the sky, the hidden rhythms that dictated life and death. She learned of Ra's eternal journey, the balance of Ma'at, and the power that held the world together. But there were gaps in the teachings, questions that no priest could answer. She saw the fear in their eyes when she asked why the gods allowed droughts, why the Nile sometimes failed, why suffering still existed despite all their prayers. The high priests in the grand temples claimed to hold all knowledge, yet they feared questions they could not control. Neferura realized that the truth she sought would not be given to her. She would have to find it herself. Despite all she had learned, Neferura still did not understand her true purpose. The priest's warning echoed in her mind, but no further signs came. No divine voices spoke again. Perhaps she had been wrong to believe she was special. Perhaps the sun's watchful gaze had been nothing more than a child's dream. And so, she tried to be like the others. She helped her father in the fields, fetching water from the river, weaving baskets with the village women. But even as she worked, the sun's warmth never left her, wrapping around her like an embrace. It was waiting watching. And deep in her heart, she knew that one day it would call upon her. She just did not know when or what it would demand. The scorching sun beat down upon Egypt, merciless and unyielding. The people looked to the Nile for salvation, but the river had betrayed them. The great flood, which for centuries had arrived with the precision of the gods, failed to come. The once fertile banks turned to dust, and the crops withered beneath the relentless heat. Farmers pleaded with the heavens, praying for rain, but the skies remained empty. Hunger clawed at the villages, and even the wealthiest noble houses felt the creeping dread of scarcity. The Pharaoh's priests gathered in the great temples, offering sacrifices and reciting ancient hymns. But their prayers fell upon deaf ears. The gods had turned away. Famine loomed like a shadow over the land, and with each passing day, desperation grew. The people began to whisper, had Egypt angered Ra? Had some unseen force disturbed the balance of Ma'at? Or was this the beginning of the end? As the drought worsened, fear spread like wildfire. The high priests of Ra declared that the people must repent, that offerings must be doubled, that greater sacrifices must be made. In the grand temples, the scent of burning incense filled the air as oxen, lambs, and even golden treasures were given to the gods. But the sun continued to burn, and the Nile remained low. The Pharaoh himself knelt before the altar of Ra, his voice rising in desperate supplication, but no sign came. Panic took hold of the kingdom. Some cried that the gods had abandoned them, while others claimed that a great sin had been committed, one so terrible that even Ra had turned his face away. In the villages, the people grew restless. Some accused the priests of failing the gods. Others turned on one another, seeking a scapegoat for their suffering. And yet, in the midst of the growing chaos, Neferura remained silent, her eyes fixed upon the sky. She did not fear the sun's wrath, for she alone could hear its whispers. For many nights, Neferura was haunted by strange dreams. She saw herself standing in a vast desert, the sky burning gold, the sands shifting beneath her feet. The sun loomed above her, enormous and alive, pulsing with an ancient energy. In her dreams it spoke not in words, but in a deep, resonating voice that filled her very soul. She did not understand its message, but she felt its urgency. Each time she awoke, her skin was slick with sweat, her heart pounding. Was it a warning? A command? Or was she finally beginning to understand the purpose that had lingered just beyond her reach all her life? She knew she could no longer ignore it. The drought, the dying land, the endless prayers that went unanswered, this was no ordinary disaster. Something was out of balance. Something was wrong with the order of the heavens. And she was the only one who could hear its call. When she told her father of her dreams, his face darkened with fear. "Forget them, Neferura," he warned. "No good will come of this." But she could not forget. The sun was calling her, and she could not turn away. Determined to find answers, Neferura set out on a journey to the great city of Heliopolis, home of the Temple of Ra. It was there that the high priest kept the sacred texts, the knowledge of the gods written upon ancient scrolls. If there were answers to be found, they would be there. Her father begged her not to go, fearing that the temple priests would see her as a blasphemer. But Neferura had made up her mind. She walked for days under the merciless sun, its heat burning her skin. But she did not falter. The journey was long and treacherous, the roads filled with desperate travelers seeking refuge from the famine. She passed villages where people knelt in prayer, their eyes hollow with hunger. She saw temples where priests called upon Ra with increasing desperation, their voices hoarse from endless chanting. But Neferura knew the truth: their prayers would not be answered. The gods had not turned away. Something far greater was happening, and she was the only one who could uncover the truth. When Neferura arrived at the Temple of the Sunday, she was met with suspicion. The high priests, draped in their sacred robes, towered above her, their eyes filled with doubt. A mere woman, a commoner, what business did she have in the house of the gods? But Neferura did not waver. She stepped forward, her voice steady. "I have seen visions of the sun," she declared. "I have heard its voice. Something is wrong with the heavens, and I have come for answers." Laughter rippled through the temple halls. A woman, claiming to have spoken with the gods. It was absurd, heretical even. The high priest, an aging man with eyes like cold stone, stepped forward. "Only the chosen of Ra may interpret the will of the gods," he said. "What makes you believe you are among them?" Neferura raised her palm, revealing the mark she had carried since birth. The laughter died. The priests exchanged wary glances, uncertain now. They did not know what to make of her. But before they could send her away, she knelt before the altar and whispered a prayer unlike any they had ever heard. The temple fell into stunned silence as Neferura's voice rose in a chant no priest had ever spoken before. It was not from their sacred scrolls. Not a prayer taught by the temple. It was something older, something raw and unbroken by time. The air around her seemed to hum, as if the very walls of the temple recognized the words she spoke. The priests hesitated, caught between fear and awe. And then, as her voice reached its final note, the earth trembled beneath them. Gasps filled the room. Outside, a terrible stillness took hold of the sky. The sun, which had once blazed overhead with merciless fury, suddenly stopped. It did not set. It did not move. It simply remained frozen at its highest point, locked in place, as if the heavens themselves had obeyed her call. A deafening silence filled the air. The priests fell to their knees, their faces pale with terror. Neferura opened her eyes, staring up at the motionless sun, her heart pounding in her chest. She had done it. She had stopped the sun. But in that moment, she realized a terrible truth. She had no idea how to make it move again. The world stood still beneath an unyielding sky. The sun, frozen in its peak, bathed the land in eternal daylight. At first, the people rejoiced, believing it to be a sign of divine favor. Perhaps Ra had finally answered their prayers. But as the hours stretched on without a single shift in the heavens, joy turned to unease. Shadows did not move. The air remained thick with the heat of midday, and the Nile shimmered under a relentless golden glare. Fear crept into the streets of Thebes and Memphis, into the homes of nobles and farmers alike. The animals grew restless, birds refusing to return to their nests, nocturnal creatures hiding in confusion. The crops, already weakened by drought, began to wither further under the ceaseless sun. In the temples, the priests fell into a desperate frenzy, calling upon Ra to resume his journey. But the heavens remained silent. Panic spread like wildfire. Had the gods abandoned them? Had the balance of Ma'at been shattered forever? And in the great temple of Heliopolis, Neferura stood among the trembling priests, staring at the sky with a heart filled with both awe and dread. She had done what no mortal had ever dared. She had stopped the sun. But now, as the world teetered on the brink of disaster, one question loomed over her like a shadow. Had she doomed them all? The moment the sun stopped moving, Messengers were dispatched to the pharaoh's palace, their feet pounding against the stone streets as they carried the impossible news. By the time they arrived, the royal court was already in chaos. The nobles and advisors whispered anxiously. The high priests of every temple gathered in urgent debate. The sun had always been Ra's domain, his eternal journey across the sky, a symbol of divine order. Yet now, that order was broken, and none could explain why. When the pharaoh finally spoke, his voice was calm but laced with quiet fury. "Who is responsible for this?" he demanded. The temple priests hesitated, but they knew there was only one answer. "A woman," one finally admitted. "A woman who spoke to the sun." The court erupted in disbelief, but the pharaoh silenced them with a single gesture. "Bring her to me," he commanded. Now. Across the city, soldiers were dispatched to the temple. Neferura had barely begun to comprehend the weight of what she had done when they arrived, their armor glinting beneath the never-setting sun. There was no anger in their faces, only solemn duty. "The pharaoh has summoned you," one of them said. Neferura swallowed, steeling herself. She knew this moment would come. She had changed the sky, it's now she would face the ruler of Egypt. Neferura was led through the grand halls of the pharaoh's palace, her bare feet brushing against cold stone as golden torches flickered around her. The air was thick with tension, the weight of 1,000 eyes pressing down on her as she was brought before the ruler of Egypt. The pharaoh sat upon his gilded throne, his expression unreadable, yet his piercing gaze never left her. The high priests of Ra stood at his sides, their robes heavy with power, their faces etched with both fear and disdain. She was a heretic to theme a woman who had dared to disrupt the order of the universe. "You have stopped the sun," the pharaoh finally said, his voice slow and deliberate. "Do you deny it?" Neferura's heart pounded, but she refused to lower her head. "I do not," she answered. Gasps filled the chamber, the priests shifting uneasily. No one had expected her to be so bold. The high priest stepped forward, his voice laced with venom. "This is blasphemy," he declared. "No mortal may command the heavens. You have defied Ra himself. The world suffers because of your arrogance." The nobles murmured in agreement, fear twisting their expressions. Yet the pharaoh did not react immediately. He studied her, his sharp mind weighing possibilities. "Tell me," he said at last, "why have you done this?" Neferura clenched her fists, her voice steady. "Because the sun spoke to me. Because something is wrong." Silence fell. The pharaoh's face remained unreadable, but the gods would not allow the balance to remain broken for long. The air inside the great hall thickened, the torches flickering wildly as if caught in an unseen storm. A low, unnatural hum filled the space, and then a presence descended upon them. The great golden doors of the palace trembled, the very walls shuddering as a divine force entered the room. The priests fell to their knees at once, their foreheads pressed to the stone floor, voices trembling with reverence and terror. Neferura felt her breath catch as the air around her crackled with energy. The gods had come. A blinding light burst forth in the center of the chamber, and from it emerged a figure draped in shimmering gold, eyes burning with the fire of the sun itself. It was Hathor, the Eye of Ra, the goddess of divine wrath and restoration. "You have disrupted the balance," her voice echoed through the chamber, neither kind nor cruel, but filled with unshakable authority. "The world cannot survive an eternal day, just as it cannot endure an endless night." The pharaoh lowered his head in reverence, his voice barely a whisper. "Great lady, what must be done?" Hathor turned her blazing gaze to Neferura. The sun must move once more, she decreed. And for what has been taken, something must be given in return. A chill ran through Neferura's bones. She understood. The gods did not allow power to be used without consequence. She had taken control of the heavens, and now a price must be paid. The weight of the goddess's words settled upon Neferura's chest like stone. The balance had been broken, and it was her doing. The sun had answered her call, but it had not been hers to command. The priests still knelt in fearful silence, the pharaoh's gaze unreadable. She could feel the eyes of the entire kingdom upon her, waiting for her answer. Hathor's form shimmered, golden light radiating from her very being. To restore the order of Ma'at, there must be an exchange, she said. The sun cannot move again unless something of equal value is given. Neferura swallowed, her throat dry. She knew what the goddess meant. Life for life. A mortal had stopped the Sunnah. Mortal must pay the price for its return. The realization did not fill her with fear. Instead, there was a strange peace in knowing what had to be done. She'd always known she was different. She had always felt the sun's watchful gaze, always sensed that her path was not meant to be ordinary. Slowly, she turned to the pharaoh, to the priests, to the people who would never understand the choice she was about to make. "I will give myself," she said. A murmur of shock rippled through the chamber. Hathor inclined her head, neither pleased nor sorrowful. "Then the balance shall be restored." The light around her grew brighter, consuming everything in its golden embrace. Neferura closed her eyes, and the sun began to move once more. As Neferura stood bathed in the golden light of the goddess, a deep stillness filled the chamber. The priests, the pharaoh, the gathered nobles known, dared to speak. The weight of her decision hung heavy in the air. She had stopped the sun, and now she would pay the price to set it free. Hathor raised a hand, and a warmth, unlike any earthly fire, enveloped Neferura's body. It was not painful, nor was it frightening. It was like being embraced by the sun itself. She felt her spirit rising, lifting from the world, her body growing lighter with each passing breath. A gust of wind swirled through the palace, though no doors had opened, and the torches flickered wildly as the divine power moved through the hall. Then, beyond the walls of the temple, the impossible happened. The sun, frozen for so long in its place, began to move. The golden orb shifted, resuming its slow descent toward the horizon, bathing the land in the hues of twilight. The people outside fell to their knees, weeping in gratitude as night finally returned to Egypt. The balance of Ma'at had been restored. But Neferura was gone. For the first time in what felt like eternity, the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of crimson and gold. A cool breeze swept through the land, rustling the palms along the Nile, soothing the scorched earth. The people of Egypt stood in silent awe, watching as the natural order of the world returned before their eyes. Farmers clutched the dry soil, whispering prayers of thanks, and mothers held their children close, tears streaming down their faces. Inside the temple, the pharaoh slowly stood, his gaze fixed upon the now setting sun. The high priests remained kneeling, their heads bowed in reverence. The presence of the goddess had faded, leaving only the memory of the divine will that had passed through their halls. But Neferura was no longer there. Her body was gone. Her form vanished as if she had never existed. Only the warmth in the air, the lingering hum of something celestial, remained in her place. "She is with Ra now," one of the priests murmured. The pharaoh exhaled slowly, the weight of what had transpired pressing upon him. Neferura had done what no mortal had ever dared. She had touched the heaven sand in doing so, She had given herself to them. The pharaoh, though awed by what had occurred, knew that Neferura's story was too dangerous to be told. A mortal who had commanded the sun? A woman who had altered the course of the heavens? It was knowledge that could shake the very foundation of the kingdom. The high priests, still uneasy with the power she had wielded, pleaded for her name to be stricken from history. "It is not meant for mortals to command the gods," they said. "To speak her name is to invite her fate." And so, an order was given: Neferura's name would be erased. No records would bear her story. No monuments would hold her image. The scrolls of the temple would never speak of the woman who made the sun stand still. To the world, she had never existed. But even as the temple scribes followed their orders, even as her name was wiped from the annals of time, the people did not forget. They spoke of her in whispers, in hushed voices beneath the cover of night. The woman who had defied the gods. The woman who had walked between the mortal and the divine. Neferura. A name lost to history, yet never truly gone. Years passed, and Neferura's story became legend. Though her name was never spoken in the great temples of Ra, the people did not forget. In quiet corners of villages, by the flickering glow of oil lamps, elders told the tale of the woman who had once spoken to the sun. Some claimed she'd been taken to the heavens, riding beside Ra in his great solar bark. Others believed she had become part of the light itself, watching over Egypt in secret. The priests denied such stories, warning that to speak of her was heresy. Yet, in the stillness of the temples, beneath the murals of gods and kings, some swore they could hear a faint voice, a whisper carried on the wind, like a prayer left unanswered. Many seasons later, on a quiet morning by the banks of the Nile, a child was born. The midwife gasped as she unwrapped the newborn from her linen swaddling, for there, upon the infant's tiny palm, was a golden mark, the same symbol that had once graced the hand of a woman whose name had been erased from history. The villagers exchanged uneasy glances. Was this a sign, a warning, or had Neferura's spirit returned, reborn in another form? No one could say for certain. But as the morning sun rose above the river, casting its golden light over the land, the child opened her eyes for the first time. And in them, there was something ancient, something that had seen the sky hold its breath once before. The cycle had begun again. The gods were still watching, and one day they would call upon her once more.